Maya stood in front of the apartment building, squinting up at its weathered exterior, as the evening sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. The building was old, too old maybe. The bricks, once a rich red, were now faded, and the windows were smeared with years of grime. The front door, a heavy thing of rotting wood, creaked on its hinges as it opened. The place had been around long enough to hold more than a few secrets, and Maya, fresh from a small town and hungry for city life, was about to discover some of them. She ran her fingers through her tangled hair, took a deep breath, and forced herself to step inside. She had little choice. The university had provided a list of potential places to rent, but when Maya had seen the price tags on most of them, her heart sank. This one, on the other hand, was affordable, barely. The landlord, an older man with sharp eyes and a strangely unsettling smile, had assured her that the building had charm and character. And despite a few broken floorboards here and there, it was in perfectly good shape. What he didn't mention was the lingering musty smell that seemed to cling to the place like a second skin. Maya's apartment, number 312, was on the third floor. The narrow staircase creaked beneath her feet as she climbed, each step a protest. She paused for a moment on the landing, looking down the dim hallway. The paint on the walls had long peeled away, leaving the plaster exposed in some areas, revealing an unhealthy combination of cracks and decay. The flickering overhead light buzzed intermittently, casting a strobe effect over the empty hall. But what really struck her was the silence. It wasn't just a quiet building. It was the kind of silence that felt oppressive, like something was pressing down on her from all directions. No sounds from the neighbors, no distant hum of the city, not even the faintest echoes of footsteps. She tried to shake it off and found 312 at the end of the hall. The door was a faded shade of beige, with a small peephole that seemed to stare back at her with too much intensity. She fumbled with the old brass key and turned it in the lock, the sound echoing like a death knell. The apartment smelled of mildew and old carpet, but it wasn't as bad as the hallway. It was small, very small, just a living area with a kitchenette and a bathroom off to the side. The walls were painted a sickly yellow, and the carpet was threadbare, the fibers crushed underfoot. A single window overlooked the street, though most of the view was obscured by a growing layer of grime. Still, it would do, for now. Maya set her bags down on the small couch that was tucked into one corner, the cushions squeaking in protest. She let out a sigh, brushing her hands through her hair again, as if trying to shake off the unease that had settled in her chest. The thought of her first night here, alone in this unfamiliar space, made her feel more vulnerable than she cared to admit. The silence was unnerving, but perhaps it was just a product of being in a new place. Maybe she was just imagining things. She explored the apartment, slowly, carefully, checking every nook and cranny. The bedroom had a single bed, a plain wooden dresser, and a cracked mirror that hung crookedly above the dresser. She adjusted it, but it didn't seem to make a difference. The glass reflected her image in a way that felt distorted, as if someone were watching her from the other side. When she moved into the bathroom, she froze in front of the small, grimy sink. Her reflection seemed to linger for a second longer than usual, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. By the time the sun had set, the chill of the evening was creeping in through the cracked window. Maya decided to unpack the rest of her things, but her mind kept drifting. Every sound seemed magnified in this quiet, forgotten building. The creak of the floorboards, the faint buzzing of the old fridge, the distant hum of traffic from a street. Far below, it was the tapping that got to her first. Maya had just finished unpacking a few boxes when she heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping sound coming from the wall beside her. At first, she assumed it was the pipes, settling or making the usual house noises. But this was different. The sound was deliberate, almost like someone was knocking, but in a pattern. Tap, tap, tap. She froze, her fingers still gripping the edge of the cardboard box. She turned her head toward the wall, a shiver running down her spine. Tap, tap, tap. A soft, subtle noise, but unmistakable. Her mind raced, trying to rationalize it. The pipes, maybe? The old building's age? But no, it sounded like someone was on the other side. She shook her head. It couldn't be. Get a grip, Maya, she whispered to herself. She shrugged it off as best as she could. Her body was tense, though, the hairs on her neck prickling as if they were listening for something just out of reach. She pulled a blanket from the couch and wrapped it tightly around herself, trying to dismiss the growing unease that clawed at her chest. That night, after a dinner of takeout and a few too many episodes of an old sitcom to distract her, Maya tried to sleep. The bed, though small and uncomfortable, was at least hers. She tucked herself into the thin covers, closing her eyes, hoping that sleep would come quickly, but it didn't. The tapping started again, faint at first, but with each passing minute, it grew louder. Tap, tap, tap. Maya bolted upright, her heart pounding. She could feel the presence of the sound pressing against her, coming from the walls. She listened closely, willing herself not to panic, but the tapping had turned into something else, something deeper. The sound was coming closer, her breath caught in her throat, and then, as if on cue, the voice came. Maya. The whisper was soft, but it sent a ripple of terror straight to her core. She stilled, staring into the darkness, her heart racing. Her name. She had heard it. A soft, rasping voice. No one else was here. Maya. She couldn't move. The words barely registered in her foggy mind. Her ears rang with the sound of her own heartbeat. 1,000 thoughts swirling together, but one thing was clear. Whatever was behind that wall was aware of her, and it was calling her name. Maya lay in her bed, motionless, her eyes wide open, staring into the dark corner of the room where the tapping had first begun. She could still feel the cold, creeping terror gnawing at her insides. Her mind raced, but the only thing she could focus on was the soft whisper of her name. Maya. It had come again, unmistakable. A voice so real, it was as though someone was standing beside her, their breath hot against her ear. But when she spun around, no one was there. The room was empty, and the shadows seemed to stretch and sway as if they were alive. The whisper was faint now, but Maya could feel the presence of it, something pressing against her, moving just beyond the periphery of her senses. She had to be imagining it. It was the isolation, the new place, the stress of moving. That was it, right? But still, the tapping echoed through her thoughts. Tap, tap, tap. She reached for her phone, checking the time. 2:47 a.m. The apartment was suffocatingly silent again. Whatever it wasn't real. She was just tired. It was just the apartment settling, the old building creaking under its weight. Nothing to be afraid of. The silence seemed to stretch on for hours, and for a brief moment Maya thought she might have finally drifted off to sleep. But then the tapping started again. Tap, 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 closer. The sound wasn't just in the walls anymore. It was coming from beneath the floorboards, beneath her feet. It was as if something was moving through the space, crawling toward her, ever so slowly. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the sound now, clearer than before, closer. It was deliberate. It was like a message, but a message from who? Or what? The voice came again. Maya. Help us. The air around her grew colder, a biting chill that seemed to seep through the walls from the floorboards, from the very earth itself. She pulled the covers tighter around her, fighting the rising panic in her chest. But the whispers weren't stopping. They were getting louder now, closer. She felt like she was being pulled toward them. She sat up slowly, her limbs trembling. Her breath came in shallow gasps, but she couldn't bring herself to move. The whispers swirled around her, thick and unintelligible, all calling her name. Maya, Maya, Maya. But then, amidst the chaos, one voice rose above the others. Maya, it's time. Her blood ran cold. The voice was unmistakable. Her mother's voice. The whispering stopped, but the coldness remained, swirling around her like a storm. Maya could hear her pulse in her ears, thudding louder and louder, drowning out every other sound. She didn't want to move, but her body refused to stay still. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something deeper. It was a compulsion. She had to go to the wall. She stood unsteady on her feet and walked toward the corner of the room where the tapping seemed to be the loudest. Her skin crawled as she reached out to touch the peeling wallpaper, the coarse texture sending shivers through her fingertips. The room seemed to stretch before her, everything slowing down, every step a battle between fear and curiosity. She could feel the air growing heavier, pressing against her chest. But she couldn't stop now. She had to know. She pressed her ear to the wall. For a moment there was silence. Then, a single word echoed through her mind. Closer. Suddenly the tapping resumed, but now it was sharper, more frantic. It was as if something was trying to break through, something desperate to escape. Help us. The voice was clearer now. It sounded human, and it was pleading. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a cry for help. The walls groaned under the pressure of whatever was behind them, and Maya's pulse quickened. She stumbled back, her hand slipping away from the wall, but her eyes were fixed on a small crack, an imperfection in the plaster, barely visible unless you were standing at just the right angle. The crack was widening. She took a hesitant step, back toward the corner, watching as the space between the wall's seams grew larger. For a moment she thought she was seeing things. The wall is breathing. It was as if the crack was expanding, pulsing like a heartbeat. A dark shape seemed to shift behind the plaster, something long and thin, almost like a shadow. She blinked, but it was gone. The voice came again, louder now, almost frantic. Maya, please. It wasn't just her imagination anymore. The wall was alive, breathing, moving. Something was trapped inside. Her heart raced, her breathing shallow. She couldn't make sense of it. This wasn't possible, this wasn't real. Yet here she was, standing in the middle of her new apartment, staring at a wall that seemed to be calling her name. Before she could pull away, the wall cracked again, louder, sharper this time, and a jagged, gaping hole appeared, large enough for someone to crawl through. From the depths of the hole came the unmistakable sound of scraping, like nails running against stone. The air around her turned frigid, as though something was reaching through the space, desperate to get out. Maya, her breath caught in her throat, and before she could stop herself, her hand reached forward, trembling toward the jagged hole. As her fingers brushed the edges of the plaster, a cold, clammy hand wrapped around her wrist. She yanked her hand back, gasping for air, her chest tight with terror. The voice whispered again, but this time it wasn't her mother's voice. It was someone else. Someone far older, far more sinister, and it was laughing. Maya's pulse raced as she stumbled backward, her back pressed against the cold wall. The chilling sensation of a hand. No, not a hand. Something gripping her wrist still lingered, like the imprint of an icy, clammy touch. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck standing up, every instinct screaming at her to run, to get out of that apartment, to leave the building behind. But she couldn't move. The hole in the wall, a jagged wound in the very fabric of the apartment, seemed to pulse, its edges expanding and contracting as though it were alive. The whispering started again, faint at first, then louder, drowning out all other sounds. Maya. The voice was distorted, twisted, like it was being spoken underwater. It was familiar, but wrong. She shook her head, trying to block it out, but the voice was relentless, crawling into her ears, burrowing into her thoughts. Maya, please. Her breath caught in her throat. It was too much. This couldn't be real. There was no way, no logical explanation. The apartment was old, sure, but this was something out of a nightmare. She pressed her palms to her eyes, trying to force the images away, but they only became clearer. That crack, that hole in the wall, the feeling of something reaching through it, that laugh, low and guttural like something ancient and hungry. The whispering stopped. The air was still. A soft scraping sound broke the silence, like something clawing at the wood or worse, something trying to claw its way out from behind the wall. The sound was so close now, so real, that she could almost feel it under her fingertips. It was as though whatever was trapped inside the wall was aware of her, was waiting for her. The laugh came again, but this time, it wasn't the distorted voice from before. It was clearer, sharper, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. She couldn't stop herself. Her hand reached out once again, this time against her will, as if her body were acting independently of her mind. Her fingertips brushed against the jagged edges of the hole, and as they did, the scraping sound intensified. Maya, the voice. Again. It was behind her now, close, so close. She whipped around, heart hammering in her chest, but the apartment was empty. Empty except for the oppressive darkness that seemed to fill every corner, every shadow. There was no one there. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. She could hear the thudding of her heartbeat in her ears, the hairs on the back of her neck, rising with every passing second. She stepped away from the hole, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor, her body refusing to obey her command to move. Then, the whispers came again, but they weren't just coming from the walls anymore. No, they were coming from everywhere. Maya, they echoed from every corner of the apartment, from the ceiling, the floor, the air itself. It was as if the apartment had come alive, and the walls were speaking to her, reaching out to her, calling her. The voices were no longer faint murmurs. They were sharp, urgent, desperate. Maya, it's not safe here. You shouldn't have. Come. The voice, a new one, deep and gravelly, was unrecognizable, as though it was something far older, far more ancient than anything human. Maya's eyes darted around the room, searching for the source, but there was nothing. The walls seemed to close in on her, pressing against her, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. She staggered toward the door, reaching for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The door, the one she had entered through not an hour ago, was locked, though she hadn't touched it. Her pulse quickened as panic set in. I'm trapped. She pulled frantically at the door, tugging it, shaking it, but it wouldn't open. Her thoughts spiraled out of control. What was happening? Why wouldn't the door open? She had to get out. She had to. The sound of creaking floorboards broke through her frantic thoughts. It was coming from behind her. Slowly, deliberately, like someone or something was moving toward her. Maya. The voice came again, but this time it wasn't from the walls. It wasn't from the shadows. It was behind her. She could feel it. A presence, intangible, yet undeniable. A coldness settled around her, as if someone were standing in the room with her, just out of sight. She turned sharply, eyes wide, searching the darkness, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the oppressive weight of silence. The air had turned frigid, almost painful to breathe, and yet Maya could feel a cold sweat prickling at her skin. The presence wasn't just in the room. It was in the walls. A shadow shifted in the far corner of the apartment just beyond her sight. A fleeting, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough to make her heart skip a beat. Her breath hitched in her throat. She couldn't take it anymore. Who's there? She shouted, her voice cracking. Her hands clenched into fists, shaking with both fear and anger. What do you want? The response was immediate. A burst of cold air rushed toward her, as though the apartment itself had exhaled in frustration. The shadows seemed to twist, writhe around her. The whispers turned to murmurs, then to full-fledged voices, all layered on top of each other. It was a cacophony of words she couldn't understand, a babble of desperate pleas and warnings. Maya. She froze as the voice became clear again, her own voice. It echoed through the apartment, coming from somewhere deep within the walls. It was distorted, like it was coming from behind the plaster, behind the very fabric of the building. Maya, help me. Her eyes widened in terror. It wasn't a voice calling for help. It wasn't just her voice either. It was a mockery of it. The walls seemed to close in on her, the shadows drawing tighter and tighter, the air growing colder and colder. The apartment felt alive, suffocating her. Maya. The walls creaked once again, but this time the creaking was accompanied by a new sound. A low growl like the earth itself was rumbling beneath her feet. The shadows in the corners seemed to move, coalescing into something larger, something more tangible, something alive. And just as quickly as the growl had started, it stopped. The room fell into an eerie silence, except for the still lingering whispers, the ones she could feel brushing against her skin, like invisible fingers caressing her face. The door clicked. Maya turned, her heart leaping into her throat. The door to the apartment was open. She didn't know when or how or why, but it was open. She could feel the cool night air beyond the threshold beckoning her. But as her foot hovered over the threshold, something deep in her gut told her that whatever waited outside might be just as dangerous as whatever was inside. She could feel, though she didn't know how. Something was watching her, and it was waiting for her to make a choice. Maya's heart thudded against her chest as she stood frozen in the doorway of the apartment, her eyes flickering between the open door and the eerie shadows that seemed to move within. The cool night air brushed against her skin, a sharp contrast to the suffocating warmth of the apartment, but she didn't dare step outside. The door had opened on its own. Had it? She couldn't remember, but she could feel the weight of it. The pull of something beyond that was waiting for her. The whispers were louder now, their words unintelligible but desperate. The cacophony of voices reached a fever pitch, a chorus of confusion and fear that seemed to come from the walls, from the air itself. They pressed in on her, suffocating, pushing her toward the threshold, as if something on the other side of the door was calling her, urging her to come. Maya, her name, no longer a whisper but a harsh command, a demand. It was like something was reaching through the air, pulling her with invisible hands toward the darkness beyond the door. She could feel it, could almost see it, the way the shadows seemed to shift in the hallway, thickening and curling around the edges of the doorframe like smoke. Something was waiting just beyond that point, something that could not be seen but could be felt. For a moment she thought of running, of slamming the door shut and locking herself away from whatever haunted the walls. But when she tried to pull away, she couldn't. It was as though the apartment itself had a grip on her, holding her in place. Her feet felt stuck to the floor, as if the very ground beneath her was alive, demanding that she stay. Then the growl came again. It was low and guttural, emanating from somewhere deep within the walls. It vibrated through her bones, making her teeth rattle and her skin prickle. It was so real, so close. She could feel it in her gut, in her soul. The growl deepened, becoming something more, a slow, steady rumble that filled her ears with a ringing sound, drowning out the whispers and the frantic voices. And then, suddenly, there was silence, an oppressive, thick silence that pressed in on her from all sides. She blinked, trying to adjust to the quiet, but it was unnatural, suffocating. The air was heavier now, colder, as though the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. She reached up, rubbing her arms, but the chill couldn't be chased away. She turned her head back to the apartment, her eyes flickering over the familiar, if unsettling, space. It was wrong now, somehow. The shadows that clung to the corners of the room seemed darker, thicker. The walls felt as if they were pressing in, suffocating her from every direction. In the distance, a faint scraping noise began, soft at first, but growing louder, closer. It was like nails being dragged across stone. A slow, torturous sound that made her skin crawl. The door was still open. The outside world beckoned, but something in Maya's gut told her that she couldn't leave. Not yet. But what choice did she have? She turned her head back to the door. Something pulled at her, a magnetic force that was stronger than anything she could fight. She had no idea what waited for her beyond that threshold, but every instinct screamed at her to move forward. It's waiting for you. The voice, soft but insistent, slipped into her mind again, like a snake slithering through the cracks in her thoughts. The presence on the other side of the door was more than just a feeling. It was a force, a pressure. With trembling hands, Maya stepped forward, her body moving of its own accord like a puppet on a string. The instant her foot crossed the threshold, she was hit by a wave of cold so sharp it made her gasp. The temperature had plummeted, and the air outside was so frigid it burned her lungs as she inhaled. And yet the darkness beyond the door felt like something more, something tangible. Something that could be touched, held, manipulated, as if the darkness was alive. The further she moved into the hallway, the more the shadows seemed to shift and writhe, like they were watching her, following her, but always staying just out of reach. The hallway stretched ahead of her, longer than she had ever remembered, the walls now blackened and warped, the floor uneven and cracked, as though the building itself was collapsing under the weight of whatever was lurking beneath. The overhead lights flickered erratically, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to move with a mind of their own. She took a shaky step forward, then another, her footsteps echoing down the darkened corridor. The silence from inside the apartment seemed to follow her, clinging to her like a cloak. The air outside the door felt different, oppressive, darker, as if the world itself had shifted into something unfamiliar and terrifying. The scraping sound grew louder, closer, as though something was coming from the dark end of the hallway, crawling toward her. Maya. Her name was a whisper, but it was louder now, echoing from every direction. The voice was so close it almost seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. The sound sent a cold shiver crawling down her spine. The growl, deep and menacing, followed it, vibrating through the air like the rumble of thunder in the distance. And then the whispers, all of them, began to merge into one terrifying sound. She wasn't alone. Something was here, in the hallway with her. Something dark, something hungry. With every step she took, the shadows seemed to close in on her. The dark figures at the edges of her vision, were they people? Were they shapes? They were moving, shifting in and out of sight, but they weren't real, not entirely. They were part of the building, part of whatever had been trapped inside it, part of whatever had been calling her name. Maya. The voice was no longer just a whisper. It was insistent now, desperate. A scream that echoed in her mind, shaking. Her bones. Maya, you have to help us. She stopped dead in her tracks. The voice was no longer coming from the walls. It was coming from the end of the hallway, directly ahead of her. A figure, tall and thin, shrouded in shadows, stood at the farthest point, barely visible in the flickering light, but even in the darkness she could see the outline of it. A shape, moving, a figure that wasn't human but yet had a form. Her breath caught in her throat as she took another step forward, drawn to it, unable to stop herself. The figure began to move toward her, its movements jerky and unnatural, like something dragging itself across the floor. It was coming for her, and as it approached, Maya could hear the words, broken and guttural, through the thick silence. Maya, it's your turn. You have to join us. Maya's body was paralyzed. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get as far away from the dark figure that loomed in the hallway, but her feet wouldn't move. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps, her chest tight, as if the very air around her had turned to stone. She could hear it now. The soft scrape of footsteps dragging along the floorboards, drawing closer. The shadowed figure was still moving, and it was drawing nearer, its silhouette more defined with each passing second. It was tall, impossibly so, stretching unnaturally as it glided forward, its movements jerky, as if it were stumbling, dragging itself with great effort. And then, just as it came into full view, the figure stopped. Maya's heart thudded painfully in her chest as she locked eyes with the thing at the end of the hallway. Its face, if it could be called a face, was obscured by shadows, dark tendrils of mist swirling around it, obscuring its features. But there was something about its presence that made her blood run cold. It wasn't just a figure. It was a thing, an ancient, malevolent thing, and it was looking at her. Maya. The voice rasped, the sound scraping her soul. It wasn't the whisper anymore. It wasn't the deep growl or the disembodied voice from the walls. This voice was alive, thick with a hunger that seemed to reach out for her, pulling her deeper into its dark embrace. She couldn't look away. She didn't want to look away, but she was trapped. She was stuck in place, unable to move or scream, her body betraying her. The figure took another slow step forward. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs were elongated, too thin, too gaunt. Its skin, or what could be called skin, was a pale, ashen gray, stretched taut over bones that looked far too sharp. It wore no clothes, no armor, no identity. Just the same, undulating mass of shadow that coiled around it like a cloak. "Maya, help us," it repeated, its voice like the sound of rusted metal scraping against stone. It wasn't begging, it wasn't pleading, it was commanding, drawing her in with the force of its presence. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run, but she couldn't. The darkness had hold of her, and the more she struggled, the tighter it gripped. The figure took another step. "Please," it whispered, as if it was trying to coax her, to make her understand. "It's time, Maya. It's your turn. You have to join us." The words didn't make sense. None of this made sense. Her mind screamed at her to wake up, to realize that she was trapped in some twisted nightmare, to somehow wake up before it was too late. But she knew this wasn't a dream. No, this was real. It was too real. The figure was almost upon her now, and Maya could feel the pull of its gaze, if you could call it a gaze, piercing into her very being, like a deep ancient hunger that wanted to consume her. Her knees were weak, her hands trembling as she fought to regain control of her body. But the fear, the overwhelming terror, was too much. She had to do something. Summoning every ounce of willpower she had left, she forced herself to take a step back. The figure didn't move. It only stood there, watching her, its presence suffocating. The air around her felt thick with pressure, as though the weight of the apartment had increased tenfold. The temperature had dropped even further, the chill sinking into her bones. She could feel the darkness closing in, the walls pressing in tighter, as if the whole building was alive and wanted to swallow her whole. "Don't go," the figure murmured. Its voice was now strangely soft, almost gentle, but there was no mistaking the threat behind it. "You cannot leave. Not now, not ever." The words wrapped around her like chains, holding her in place. But she couldn't stay here. She couldn't let this thing get to her. Maya's heart pounded against her ribs, and she knew, deep down, that if she didn't act now, she would never have the chance to again. Without thinking, she turned and ran. The sound of her feet pounding against the floor echoed through the hallway, but it was drowned out by the sudden shrill sound of something dragging behind her. The figure hadn't moved, but it was still coming after her, its presence closing in. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she ran toward the end of the hallway, toward the stairwell that led to the ground floor. She didn't dare look behind her, but she could feel the darkness crawling after her, chasing her like a living, breathing thing. As she reached the door to the stairwell, she grabbed the handle and yanked it open. The door groaned in protest, but it gave way. She darted through, slamming the door shut behind her. But even then, she could feel the weight of the apartment pressing against her, the walls pressing against her chest. She could hear the faint scratching sound, the low growl from the hallway. It was still there, waiting. The stairwell was dark, and as she descended the stairs, her mind raced. She needed to get out. She needed to leave this building. But what if the entity followed her? What if it wasn't done yet? What if it followed her all the way down to the streets, to the very ends of the world? The thought made her stop in her tracks. She turned to look behind her, half expecting to see the dark figure looming in the stairwell behind her. But there was nothing. Nothing. Except the oppressive darkness that stretched ahead of her, swallowing the stairs, the walls, the entire building. It was as though the building itself had become a part of the thing that hunted her, a living extension of its hunger. But just as she was about to move again, she heard something else. A sound from below. Footsteps. Soft, slow, dragging. Just like before. No, it wasn't over. Something was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs, and the thing that had been chasing her had followed her. Maya's pulse thundered in her ears as she descended the staircase. the echoes of her frantic footsteps, the only sound in the suffocating silence. Each step felt heavier than the last, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. Her chest was tight, her breath shallow and erratic. Every instinct told her to keep moving, to run as far and fast as she could. But the fear that twisted in her gut was overwhelming, paralyzing. The footsteps behind her were softer now, almost imperceptible, but still there, dragging, slow, deliberate. Something was following her. She didn't dare look back. She couldn't afford to. The darkness around her seemed to press in tighter with each passing second, as though the walls of the stairwell were alive, inching closer, squeezing the air from her lungs. She reached the bottom of the stairs, her foot hitting the cold, unforgiving concrete with a dull thud. Her eyes darted around the dimly lit hallway, the faint yellow light flickering above her, casting long, grotesque shadows against the walls. The door to the outside world, the only escape, was just ahead. But the closer she got, the more oppressive. The air became thick with the weight of something ancient, something that didn't belong. The footsteps behind her grew louder. "It's not real. It's not real." The mantra repeated in her mind like a prayer, a desperate attempt to stave off the panic that threatened to consume her. But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself, she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of danger that clung to her, that thing that had followed her down the stairs, relentless and hungry. She turned the corner, her eyes locked on the door. Her hand reached out for the handle, but a scream, a shrill, inhuman scream echoed from the bottom of the stairwell, shattering the silence like glass. Maya's breath caught in her throat and her body froze. It was too close. The air grew colder, the temperature plunging into an unbearable chill. She could see her breath, sharp and white in the dim light, swirling around her like smoke. The door was just a few feet away, but it felt as though the space between her and it stretched on for miles, each step feeling heavier than the last, as though the building itself was pulling her back, keeping her trapped inside. No. 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 She reached for the door handle, her fingers trembling violently, and yanked it. But the door didn't budge. The cold metal of the handle burned her palm, like the door itself was alive, feeding on her fear. A sickening growl rippled through the darkness behind her. It wasn't the same sound she had heard earlier, but something more, something worse. It was low, guttural, but it wasn't just a sound. It was a force, a presence that vibrated through the walls and the floor, an energy that seemed to suffocate everything it touched. It's too late. Her pulse raced faster, her skin slick with cold sweat. She jerked at the door again, desperate, but it refused to open, as though it had sealed itself shut, trapping her here. The shadows at the far end of the hall stirred, shifting unnaturally, as if they had a life of their own. The walls seemed to stretch and bend, warping the space around her, making the hallway feel like a labyrinth, a twisting, turning maze of dark corridors. The shadows moved, forming shapes, figures. She could make out outlines now, long, thin shapes too tall and gangly to be human. Their heads were tilted at strange angles, their limbs impossibly elongated, moving with jerky, unnatural motions. They're here. Maya's breath hitched in, her throat as the figures slowly advanced toward her, their movements synchronized, as though they were all connected by some unseen force. They were silent now, but their presence was deafening, their malevolent energy thickening the air around her. "Maya," the voice came again, soft, almost a whisper, but it was everywhere, surrounding her. The voice was familiar, twisted, distorted like a memory from a dream, but it was wrong, so wrong. It wasn't just one voice, but many, layering over each other, becoming one horrifying chorus of whispers. She stumbled backward, her heart racing, panic clawing at her chest. She slammed into the wall, and the impact sent a jolt of pain through her spine, but she couldn't focus on it. All she could think about was getting out of here, getting away from them. There has to be another way out. Her eyes darted around the hallway, desperate for something, anything that could help her. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows creeping toward her like something alive. as if the very fabric of the building was suffocating her, pulling her deeper into its dark heart. Her gaze flicked to the windows. They were small, narrow slits, set high on the walls, but they were open. Barely open. The space between the bars was enough for her to slip through if she could reach it. Without thinking, she ran. She bolted for the farthest window, ignoring the shadows that seemed to reach. For her, the figures closing in around her. Her heart hammered in her chest and the cold seemed to deepen, the air thicker with every step. The walls groaned, the very building trembling as if it were alive and aware of her escape. She reached the window, her fingers grasping for the bars, her breath ragged. But the moment she touched them, something cold and unforgiving wrapped around her wrist, its grip like iron. She screamed, trying to pull away, but the force was too strong. Her vision blurred as the shadows swirled around her, closing in, pushing her back toward the hallway. Maya! The voice was right next to her, now cold and suffocating, its breath like ice against her ear. She twisted, but there was no one there. Only the shadows, only the figures, only the endless dark. Her body froze, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. The grip on her wrist tightened, dragging her away from the window, dragging her into the darkness, into the waiting arms of whatever horror had taken root in this building. The last thing she saw was the door she had tried to open, the one that had been her only escape, slowly closing on its own, sealing her fate. Maya's mind reeled as the darkness closed in on her. The cold grip around her wrist tightened, with unnatural strength, pulling her away from the window, dragging her deeper into the labyrinthine hallway. The walls seemed to bend and twist, their edges warping like rippling water. She could feel the pulse of the building, the vibrations in the floor beneath her feet, as if the very foundation of the place was alive, breathing, responding to her fear. She pulled desperately against the unseen force holding her, but it was useless. Whatever this thing was, this presence, it wasn't going to let her go. The shadowed figures around her moved closer, their jerky, unnatural movements a grotesque mockery of human motion. Their long, bony limbs reached out, their fingers clawed and twitching, as though they could sense her terror, feeding off it, growing stronger with every heartbeat. Maya. The voice was back. That horrible voice, now more insistent, more commanding, and it echoed from every corner, every shadow, as though the very walls themselves were speaking to her. She twisted her body, desperate to pull away, but the force, holding her wrist, didn't relent. It was like being trapped in a vice, an invisible, suffocating grip that squeezed tighter with every breath. Maya, you don't understand, the voice continued, its tone shifting from cold and indifferent to something pleading, and something else entirely, something darker, like a predator pretending to be a friend. You're part of this place, you always have been. The world spun around her. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps, the panic creeping into every part of her body. She couldn't make sense of the words, couldn't understand the message. Behind them, her mind was a blur, her thoughts racing in 1,000 directions, none of them leading to anything that made sense. Suddenly, a surge of adrenaline shot through her, her fear turning to defiance. She wrenched her arm free from the shadow's grip with all the strength she could muster, feeling a burning sting as the cold, unyielding force released its hold. She staggered back, the figures hesitating for a moment, as though they were momentarily thrown off balance. But then they began to move again, slowly, deliberately, creeping toward her in that unnatural, jerky way. There was no time to think. She turned and ran, her legs pumping as fast as they could, but the hallway stretched out before her, impossibly long, like a tunnel that would never end. The shadows slithered along the walls, reaching for her, pulling at her, as though they were alive and hungry. The figures were moving faster now, and she could hear them, feel them, drawing nearer, their breath ragged and wet in the air behind her. The door to the outside world, the one she had tried to reach, was only a few feet away, but it was closing, slowly but surely, as if it were drawn to her, responding to her desperate attempt to escape. The handle was within reach, but her mind couldn't focus. She was too terrified too lost in the chaos of what was happening. She shoved her body toward the door with a final burst of energy, her hand slamming against the cold metal of the handle. But just as she touched it, the sound of the growl erupted again. This time, louder, more ferocious, vibrating through her chest. The door slammed shut in front of her with a violent force, the heavy thud of metal on metal reverberating in her ears. She screamed, the sound tearing through her throat. She was trapped again, no escape, no way out. The shadows were closing in, the figures advancing with terrifying speed. "No!" she shouted, pounding her fists against the door. "Let me out! Let me out!" Her fists hit the door again and again, but it was no use. The door didn't budge. She wasn't going anywhere. The shadows crept closer, curling around her feet, climbing up her legs, their touch cold and clammy, as though they were trying to swallow her whole. The figures surrounding her raised their heads, and for the first time, Maya saw their faces, or rather the absence of them. Their faces were smooth, featureless, just dark voids where eyes should have been. Black, empty holes that seemed to pull in the light, devouring everything in their path. "Maya." The voice came again, but this time it was no longer distant. It was close, too close. Right behind her. She turned, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end as she came face to face with the source of the voice. It was a figure, standing, just a few feet away from her, tall and thin, its long, bony arms hanging by its sides. Its skin was stretched tight over its body, pale and sickly, but its face was something else entirely. A smooth blank canvas where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, but instead, nothing. Just blackness, an endless void that seemed to stretch into infinity. "Maya, you're awake now," the voice whispered. But it wasn't the same voice from before. It was her voice, distorted, broken, as if it had been pulled out of her own mind and twisted into something. "You've been asleep for so long." Maya's heart lurched. Awake? What did it mean? Was she asleep? Was she dreaming? The figure moved, its body contorting unnaturally as it approached her, its head tilting in an odd, almost mechanical way. "I've been waiting for you," it said, its voice like 1,000 whispers blending together, each one more broken than the last. "You always come back. You can't escape." The darkness around her began to swirl faster, as though it were alive, pulling her toward it. She felt her body shift, like she was being pulled into a different place, a different time, a different dimension. The building around her distorted, the walls bending and breaking apart, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. "No," Maya screamed, but the word was swallowed by the shadows, lost in the abyss. "You belong here now, Maya," the figure said, its voice rising into a shrill, maddening crescendo. "You always have." Everything around her collapsed into blackness. The darkness felt suffocating, as though it were pressing in from all sides, closing in, tightening, suffocating her. Maya couldn't move. Her body felt heavy, like it was sinking into the very fabric of the shadow. She tried to scream, to call for help, but the sound of her voice was swallowed by the void, lost in the swirling emptiness around her. For what felt like hours, she floated in that eternal blackness, suspended in time, unable to escape, unable to make sense of anything. Her heart raced, her pulse pounding in her ears, but there was no sound, no air, no light. Just the cold, suffocating void that clung to her like a second skin. And then, suddenly, the darkness fractured. A single beam of light shot through the inky void, piercing the suffocating blackness. Maya blinked, her eyes struggling to adjust as the light began to grow, filling the space around her. Slowly, shapes began to emerge from the light. Forms, silhouettes, the faintest outlines of something solid. It was like being pulled out of the void and thrust into a new place, a different world. As the light grew brighter, the shape solidified into something more familiar. A room. A dimly lit room with peeling wallpaper and dust-covered furniture. The air heavy with the scent of decay. Maya could feel the cold, musty air around her as her feet found solid ground again, her body finally responding to her commands. She looked around, disoriented. The room was empty, at least it seemed empty, but there was something about it that felt wrong, as though it were a place she should recognize, but couldn't. She felt a pull in her chest, a sickening sense of déjà vu, like she had been here before, like she had always been here. Maya. Her breath caught in her throat as the voice echoed again, the same voice that had been chasing her through the darkness. But this time, it didn't sound distant. It sounded close, too close. She turned, but no one was there. The room seemed to stretch out before her, the walls leaning in, warping around her as if the room itself were alive. The air felt thick, suffocating, pressing against her skin, as though it were trying to squeeze the very life from her. And then, on the far side of the room, something caught her eye. It was a mirror, an old, tarnished mirror that stood tall against the wall, its surface cracked and cloudy with age. But it was the only thing in the room that seemed to hold any weight, any significance. Maya's eyes locked onto it, the feeling of dread creeping up her spine. She had to go to it. She had to know what was in the mirror. It was almost as if the mirror was calling to her. She stumbled toward it, her feet dragging, as though something invisible was pulling her forward, making her approach the mirror against her will. As she got closer, she saw her reflection, but it wasn't the reflection she was expecting. Her face was distorted, twisted. Her eyes were wide and glassy, staring at her with a blank emptiness, like she was looking at a ghost, a hollow shell of who she once was. Her skin was pale, almost sickly, and there were dark circles under her eyes as though she hadn't slept in years. But the worst part, the part that made her heart freeze, was the expression on her face. It was one of emptiness, a deep, suffocating sorrow. She didn't recognize herself. This person in the mirror was not the Maya who had run down the hallway, the Maya who had fought to escape the darkness. No, this was someone else. Maya reached out, trembling, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of the mirror. But as she touched it, her reflection did the same. And then the reflection smiled. The smile was twisted, crooked, like something had broken inside her, something ancient and malevolent that had been hidden for so long. It wasn't a smile of warmth or comfort. It was a smile of hunger. Maya. The voice whispered again, now rising into a guttural growl. We've been waiting for you. Her reflection's eyes flickered, its movements jerking unnaturally, as if it were not her at all, but something pretending to be her, something hiding behind her face. Come, closer. The reflection beckoned, its voice now a sinister hiss dripping with malice. You're already here. You just don't know it yet. The room around her seemed to warp again, the walls trembling as though they were about to collapse. The mirror began to shimmer, the surface rippling like water. Maya took an involuntary step back, her heart racing, but the reflection in the mirror didn't move back. It stepped forward, its smile widening, its empty eyes now focused entirely on her. Maya, it said again, but this time the voice wasn't her own. It was an echo, 1,000 voices layered together, whispering, chanting her name in unison. Don't you see? You've always been part of this place. You can't escape it. You belong here. Maya stumbled backwards, her breath ragged as her vision blurred. The shadows in the corners of the room began to swirl once more, pulling toward the mirror, growing thicker, darker, as if they were feeding into it. The reflection moved again, its mouth opening wide in a grotesque, unnatural way, as though it were about to speak to her. The air turned freezing cold, biting at her skin, and the darkness around the mirror deepened, folding inward like a mouth, about to consume her whole. The mirror's surface rippled again, and for a moment Maya saw something, someone behind her. A figure, tall and thin, its face obscured by shadows, but its outline unmistakable. It was standing behind her, just out of sight, watching her with those empty black voids where eyes should have been. She whipped around, but there was nothing there. Nothing. Her heart slammed against her chest, and her body froze. The voice had changed. It was no longer in her head, it was in the room. The building itself was speaking to her now. You are the key, Maya. You always have been. Her stomach dropped. The truth was clawing at her from the inside. Her eyes flickered back to the mirror, the dark figure still lurking behind her reflection, its presence growing stronger, more suffocating. And suddenly, she understood. She wasn't trapped in a nightmare. She was the nightmare. Maya's pulse hammered in her chest as she stared into the mirror, her reflection smiling at her with that unsettling, hungry grin. The distorted, twisted face that stared back was not her own, but it was. It was a grotesque mockery of her, one that showed her every fear, every weakness. The black voids where its eyes should have been grew deeper, darker, like twin black holes, sucking in every bit of light around it. She wanted to look away, to run, but the mirror held her captive. Her body refused to move, her limbs frozen by the unnatural force emanating from the glass. You can't run, Maya, the reflection whispered, its voice now layered with hundreds of others, each one a cold echo of the last. You never could. Maya's throat tightened. What does it mean? The words felt like they were suffocating her, sinking into her very bones, twisting her thoughts. She looked at her reflection's face, no longer human, its features contorting, shifting. One moment the reflection was her, pale, hollow, empty-eyed. The next it was something monstrous, an amalgamation of jagged edges and sickly, shifting skin, 1,000 mouths screaming from its face. The whispers started again, surrounding her, drowning her. It's you. You've always been here. You belong to us. She tore her gaze away from the mirror, her head spinning as she stumbled backward. The room around her seemed to distort, the walls pulling inward as though they were collapsing on themselves. The light flickered again, casting sharp shadows that twisted and stretched unnaturally, creeping toward her with an insidious purpose. It's too late. There's nowhere to run. Her breath quickened as she turned in panic, but no matter which way she went, the walls stretched, the floor buckled beneath her, as though she were trapped in an endless spiral. The air was thick with the same, suffocating, a weight she had felt in the hallway, an oppressive presence like the house itself was alive, watching, waiting. The voice came again, but this time, it wasn't just in her head. It filled the air, reverberating through her very soul. We are everywhere. We are you. You cannot escape. Maya's hands shot to her ears, pressing against them as if she could block out the words. But the voice was inside her, inside every corner of her mind. It was growing louder, louder still, until it felt like the walls themselves were screaming. No, no, please, she cried out, collapsing to her knees, her entire body trembling with terror. She could feel it. Something was shifting, something ancient and dark was waking, and she was the catalyst. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the noise, the voices, but it was impossible. Her heart was beating so fast it felt like it would burst out of her chest. Her body was on fire, burning with an unnatural cold. She gasped for breath, but it was as if the air had thickened, turned to molasses, making it impossible to take in enough to sustain her. A flicker of movement caught her eye. She opened her eyes, blinking away the darkness, and saw something, or someone, standing just beyond the mirror. A figure, tall, slender, and impossibly still. For a moment, Maya thought it was the same faceless thing she had seen before, the one that had haunted her dreams and chased her through the hallways. But this figure was different. This one was human. Maya's breath hitched. It was her. But not the hollow-eyed, distorted version in the mirror. This was the real Maya standing in front of her, unscathed, full of life, with an expression of cold, detached calm. The other Maya didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough to make Maya's skin crawl. The darkness around them thickened, swarming, and the figure reached out a hand, beckoning her forward. Come to us, it whispered. You always knew you'd end up here. Maya recoiled, stepping back, but the figure advanced toward her, its movements unnervingly graceful, as if it had no weight, no substance. It passed through the mirror without breaking the glass, the surface rippling like liquid as it stepped into the room. Maya's head spun. Was this real? Was any of this real? Before she could make sense of it, the room around her began to change again. The walls dissolved into shadows, and the floor beneath her feet shifted into something soft and stable. She was no longer standing in the room, she was in a vast empty space, an endless expanse of black. The very air felt alien, like she had stepped out of time itself. And there, standing at the center of the space, was the figure, the other Maya. This version of Maya didn't look like her anymore. She didn't look human at all. Her features had warped, elongated. Her limbs unnaturally long, and her face had become twisted and hollow. A mask of pure darkness with two glowing pinpricks where her eyes should have been. "We are one," the figure said, her voice now a low, guttural growl, as though it was speaking from deep within the earth itself. "The darkness that runs through you, the shadow that lives inside you. This place is your home, and now you will be the one to awaken it." The ground beneath Maya's feet trembled, and she stumbled, barely able to keep herself upright. Her heart thundered in her chest, the terror swallowing her whole. "No," Maya gasped, her voice trembling. "This can't be real. This can't be me." But the figure laughed, a hollow, chilling sound that echoed in the vast emptiness. It was the same laugh she had heard in her dreams, in the voices, in the shadows that had followed her from the beginning. The sound of everything wrong. "It's always been you, Maya. You are the key. You are the one who will bring us back," Maya screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the space, by the shadows, by the very air around her. The figure raised her hand, and suddenly, the darkness that had consumed her began to shift, swirling around her feet. Tendrils of shadow reached up, pulling her toward the figure. They wrapped around her ankles, her legs, her arms, until she was completely bound, suspended in midair. The figure's smile grew wider, impossibly wide, until its face was nothing but an abyss, a gaping hole in space and time, pulling everything toward it. "It's too late, Maya. You've already made your choice." The darkness consumed her, swallowing her whole. Maya's mind reeled as the darkness swallowed her whole. The void wrapped around her like cold, slithering tendrils, squeezing the air from her lungs. She was no longer sure if she was awake or dreaming, if she was alive or already dead. The oppressive weight of the shadows bore down on her, suffocating her thoughts, drowning her in a sea of nothingness. Her body hung suspended, the tendrils of shadow wrapped tightly around her, as though she were being held by the very hands of the dark forces that had tormented her from the beginning. But there was something more now, a sensation, a presence that shouldn't have been there. Something within her was stirring, something deep, hidden, locked away. The darkness was no longer just surrounding her, it was inside her. She gasped, her heart pounding in her chest as she felt her body trembling, her very soul rattling from the inside. "No, no, I can't. You think you can escape?" The voice slithered through her mind, cold and mocking, as though it were the very air around her speaking. She opened her eyes, and there it was again, the figure, the other Maya, standing just in front of her. It was no longer a mere shadow. It was her mirror image, the reflection of what she had become. The figure's face twisted into a cruel grin. The eyes, those hollow, empty voids, were now glowing faintly, two pinpricks of light in an ocean of black. "You've always known, Maya. You've always been part of this place. You are what this place needs. You are the key to everything." Maya's breath caught in her throat, the words echoing like a ringing bell in the silent abyss. Key. The word reverberated in her mind, and a flood of memories came crashing back. The coldness of the house, the whispers in the shadows, the feeling that something was watching her, waiting for her. It all made sense now. It had never been a nightmare. It had been her reality all along. She was never meant to escape. You are me," Maya whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. "You are what I'm becoming." The figure laughed, the sound low and guttural, like the growl of some ancient, terrible beast. It stepped closer, its form shifting and warping, its features melting into the very shadows that surrounded them. "Yes," the figure purred, "I am you, and you are me." We are the same. The darkness that has always lived inside you. It's only now that you see it for what it truly is. The shadows around them pulsed, undulating like a living, breathing thing. The walls of the empty space seemed to flicker, as though the very fabric of reality was unraveling, fading into nothingness. "This place is a prison," Maya whispered. "But it's more than that. It's alive." The figure nodded, slowly, its grin widening. Yes, the house, the shadows, the mirror, they are part of a larger force, something ancient, something that has always existed, waiting for the right soul to awaken it. "And you, Maya, you are that soul." Maya closed her eyes, trying to block out the horror of the truth. But the voices, the whispers, continued to press against her mind, filling her thoughts with a terrible clarity. She could feel the darkness inside her now, that pulsing, insistent force that had always been there, buried deep beneath the surface. It was her fear, her doubt, her anger, all the things she had hidden from the world, from herself. "You cannot fight it," the figure whispered, its voice now a soft, seductively calm murmur. "This is who you are. This is who you were always meant to be. You cannot escape the truth any longer, Maya. You are one of us." Maya's body trembled violently as she struggled against the shadows that bound her. She could feel them tightening around her, squeezing her, suffocating her. But within the suffocating darkness, something shifted inside her. For a moment, there was silence. A stillness that stretched on for eternity, as though the world itself had paused. The darkness seemed to hold its breath. And then Maya understood. She understood the truth. The terrible, horrifying truth. The darkness was not an external force, it was her. It was always her. It was the part of her that had been buried for so long. The part of her that she had tried to ignore, to suppress. She had always believed she was running from it, trying to escape it, but in reality she had been running toward it. The mirror had never been a window into another world. It was a reflection of her soul. In that moment, Maya made a choice. She could feel the power growing inside her, that dark, twisted power that was both a part of her and something more, something greater than herself. The shadows, the voices, the darkness, it was all part of her. She could either let it consume her or she could embrace it. She opened her eyes and the figure in front of her, her reflection, began to dissipate, its form collapsing into a swirling mass of shadows. The tendrils that held her loosened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe. She felt the power coursing through her veins, a surge of strength that was cold and sharp, but also alive. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't trying to escape. She was the darkness. With a final defiant scream, Maya embraced it. The shadows surged outward, spreading across the endless black space, swallowing everything in their path. The void rippled, and reality itself began to break apart. The house, the mirror, the walls, they all began to dissolve into nothingness, pulled into the abyss that Maya had now become. But just before everything was swallowed by the darkness, just before the last shred of reality vanished, Maya saw it, the outside world, a glimmer of light, a glimpse of freedom. It was fleeting, but it was enough. The house was gone. The nightmare was over, or was it? I hope you enjoyed the dark reflection as much as I enjoyed bringing it to life for you. The journey through Maya's terrifying world may have come to an end, but the story doesn't have to stop here. If you want to dive deeper into more horror, mystery, and thrilling narratives, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel so you never miss out on the next chilling adventure. Hit that bell icon so you'll be the first to know when new videos drop. I've got so many more stories waiting to send a chill down your spine. Comment below with your thoughts on the story. What did you think of Maya's journey? Did you see that twist coming? I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for watching. Stay tuned, stay spooky, and always remember, the darkness might be closer than you think,